Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Insurance Summit. If you've just joined us here today, my name is Kelly Edmiston. I work for the for the NAIC, but within the NAIC, the Center for Insurance Policy and Research, CIPR. For those of you who might not be familiar with CIPR, I want to start by just speaking for a couple of minutes about who we are and what we do. Jeff Sikowski is our director. I'm the policy research manager for CIPR, and Anna, my colleague, is a postdoctorate scholar. We do largely what I would call policy research. And what this is rigorous research that's meant to be accessible to non-researchers. So whether that be regulators are especially a target for our research, but also other members of the industry and the general public. But we also do academic style research or scholarship. Articles that are designed, research that's designed to enhance the state of knowledge about insurance and to be published in journals and that sort of thing. But our primary goal, our primary audience are the state regulators and others in the insurance industry. We also house the Journal of Insurance Regulation at the CIPR. It's a very accessible journal in the sense that it's again, very rigorous research that's submitted and published in the journal, but it's written in such a way that people who aren't researchers for their primary occupation would be able to easily digest and understand the material. So today, Anna and I are going to speak to using secondary data to enhance our analysis of primary data. So what does that mean? Well, that's one of the primary objectives is simply to explain that very thing. What is primary data? What are secondary data? And then the primary goal is how can these data, the secondary data, make the analysis of the primary data more informative. We're also going to explain what types of data are collected by primary data or collected by the NAIC. We're going to provide some examples of how the CIPRs leverage secondary data to enhance our research using primary data. And I'm going to talk mostly about that, and then I'll turn it over to Anna, who is going to provide some examples of outside research that's leveraged secondary data, in some cases NAIC data, as secondary data to enhance their research. So generally by primary data, we mean data that's collected firsthand for a specific research purpose or study. So I'm getting ready to do a study. I need some data for that study. And so I'm going to collect the data. I might do a survey, for example, or collect some administrative data. The idea of it being primary is that it's the basic data used in the study, and I'm collecting it for the first time. With secondary data, the data was originally used for some other purpose or collected for some other purpose, but we're going to leverage that data. We're going to bring it over and use it along with our primary data to enhance the analysis of that primary data. The NAIC uses collects primary data, which we'll talk about in a second, but I'll say the CIPR leverages a great deal of secondary data. The examples of primary data collected by the NAIC, I say reams of primary data. If you looked at our data warehouse, you would be amazed about how many terabytes of data are collected by the NAIC, or at least some of you would. Just some examples of primary data collected by the NAIC are data from insurers' annual statements, and that there's a lot of data there. Data on insurance-related complaints would be another example, and various types of survey data. So even within the CIPR, we do surveys to get primary data. So just 3 quick examples within this year. In the past 12 months, we've had a survey, a financial inclusion survey, and the goal there was to, so we surveyed, it was nationally representative survey of 3,500 people to find out what their experience with insurance was, their literacy around insurance, and any kind of problems they faced and so forth with insurance. The idea is, the reason we did that is because there are a lot of surveys of financial inclusion. So the Federal Reserve does a couple. One's called the Survey of Consumer Finances. One's called the Survey of Household Economic Dynamics. There's others collected by the U.S. government. For example, the Survey of Income and Program Participation would be another one, and various census data. But those may have a question or two about insurance, but they're not focused on insurance. In fact, for the Federal Reserve surveys, for example, they're more interested in banking relationships. And so there's not that much information we can glean from the existing surveys on personal finances. And so that's why we created our own. And that's an example of collecting primary data. Another one this year, we're looking at earthquakes, specifically in the area around the Boot Hill of Missouri. My colleague, Brenda Rourke, is working on that. She could tell me what that area is called because later, because I've forgotten. But what a lot of people don't realize is there's a major fault that runs through the Boot Hill of Missouri and say the far southeastern part of Missouri. And it's a fault is large as the San Andreas Fault, if not larger. So there's a big risk, earthquake risk there. And previous surveys done by CIPR show that people don't fully, or the people who live around there, a lot of them don't understand what the risk is. They don't know how to be prepared for earthquakes and so on and so forth. And so there was a question about how do you go about informing people of earthquake risk and what sorts of things they can do about the risk of having an earthquake to protect themselves. And so Brenda and team put together videos for like commercials, public announcements about 3 different videos that showed 3 different ways of presenting information on earthquakes, and then sent out a survey to see which ones of those were most effective. So that was primary data. And then finally, the long-term care insurance. As you know, there's some, in that particular sector, there is some, the costs are going up significantly, and so that's a big issue in the long-term care insurance. And so what's happening is many people who have long-term care insurance and may have been paying for it for years are getting letters that tell them, they give them an option of paying a higher, maybe even a much higher premium to retain their insurance and current benefits, or they get a reduced benefit option. And so they pay the same rate that they've been paying in the past, but the benefits are reduced. And so we were curious about what's the best way to write that letter? So what's the best way to communicate information about these reduced benefit options and so forth? And also, how do people react to them? So for example, anger might be one reaction, or confusion. And so we did a survey around that, a couple of surveys, and which is ongoing. That's another example of primary data from that CIPR has done just in the last year. For this presentation, I'm going to enhance the definition of primary data to include not only data that we collect specifically for new data for a research purpose, but also data that we may have purchased as the principal data in a research project. So we're doing a research project, various research projects around network adequacy. We purchase data on the location, physical location, or geographic location of physicians and other healthcare practitioners. And that's in some sense the primary data. That's the principal data for those analyses. And so I'm going to refer to that as primary data just so we can talk about how we have that data and we can bring in secondary data, leverage secondary data to enhance the analysis of the geographic location of physicians. Okay, those are various projects in which we've used primary and secondary data. I know you can't see it, but these slides, I believe, will be available at some point. Here's our first example of CIPR work. This is the Atlanta, Georgia MSA. The fact that it's Atlanta is completely arbitrary, although I used to live there. So, all the red dots are the locations of primary care physicians in the Atlanta area. Why primary care? First of all, that's the area of practice that has the most physicians of all areas of practice. But also, if we were to use, for example, anesthesiologists, they're going to be around hospitals, right? They're going to be located around hospitals, so it's really going to be more where the hospitals are located than the physicians. That data itself is useful. So, for example, we can see in the southeast part of the metropolitan area, there's a sparsity of primary care physicians, and we can see clusters in various parts of Atlanta. But if we add secondary data, in this case, census data, we can do a much more interesting analysis. In this case, we still have the red dots. In some cases, you can't see it as well. But here we've added some socio-demographic data, in fact, the percent Black or African American. And you can see that in the red area, where the red circle is, the census tracts are lighter in color. So that means the percent Black or African American is really small. And that's where the high concentrations of primary care physicians are. The darker census tracts are ones that are more heavily concentrated, Black or African American population, and you can see that there's relatively very few primary care physicians in these locations. So there's all sorts of implications of that. So that's an example of bringing in data from the census and leveraging it in a way that our primary data becomes much more interesting and useful. Another example of how, in this case, secondary data is crucial. These lines here show the change in the price of, I think, the average premium for homeowners insurance from 2018 to 2022. And you can see that, so the top line there is the Western zone for the NAIC. In 2019, it was 6% higher than in 2018. In 2020, it was 8% higher than in 2018. And then in 2022, it was 28% higher than it was in 2018. And a lot of people are up in arms about this significant rise in homeowners insurance premiums. But one thing we need to do is, this is what we would call nominal data, in the fact that, in the sense that it's not adjusted for inflation. So one kind of data we want to bring in is inflation data and adjust the growth in homeowners insurance premiums for inflation. And we can see on the right that the rise in homeowners insurance premiums isn't quite as high as or it's not as alarming, for example, as the graph where we don't adjust for inflation. In fact, in 2022, shows homeowner premiums being 13% rather than 28% higher than 2018. And then we can go further and bring in data on home values. So what are homeowners premiums related to home values? And we actually get declines in homeowner premiums relative to the value of houses. So as you know, homeowners premiums are based partly on the price of replacing a home, or that's an option. And so the home values have increased faster than actual homeowners premiums. We're doing a large project on social impact investments. We've worked on it for 2 years. These are balance sheet general fund investments by insurers that are intended to earn a market rate return, a reasonable return, but also have some sort of social impact. We use NAIC data as primary data, mainly from the annual statements, financial data. We brought in secondary data. We've got a few examples of this project. I'm just going to do one for the sake of time, but we had in there, for example, various types of investments. An example would be municipal bonds. And so of all those municipal bonds listed on the financial statements for the insurers, which ones have a social impact? Well, in order to look bond by bond, we would have to pull the paperwork for each municipal bond and look at the use of proceeds and then make a judgment as to whether that was for social impact or not. That's too much. There's no way. That's not feasible. And so what we did is we found data from the California Organized Investment Network, COIN, and in California, insurers are required, that write premiums in California are required to report data on impact investments to COIN, both environmental and social. And so we looked to see I'm continuing with the example of municipal bonds, which municipal bonds were reported to California. 40% of insurers, by the way, write in California. Which municipal bonds did they report as being social impact? And we just pulled that out and added it to our pot of social impact investments made by insurers. Then for each of those municipal bonds, we knew what the QSIP was, the number that identifies the bonds. So we could go to all the other insurance companies that do not write in California and see which ones held those particular bonds. And we add all that together and we get a better measure of how many municipal bonds of social impact are held by insurance companies. And we did that for other investments as well, not just municipal bonds. I'm going to skip this. We then brought in data from the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board, which allowed us to compare the return on social impact municipal bonds versus traditional or non-impact bonds. It turns out that non-impact bonds have a slightly higher return. And so I'm going to leave it. These are another thing we did was climate risk. We brought in climate indicators to show which municipal bonds had the greatest climate risk, and we looked at the resources that are used to pay the municipal bonds. So if it's a bond from West Virginia, the state of West Virginia, what are the state of West Virginia's revenues? Then we looked at how much of those revenues come from climate-sensitive sectors, and then we got an overall measure of the climate riskiness of the bond. And so I'm going to turn it over to Anna. I'm sorry that last part was a little quick, but I want to give some time for her. All these are the slides are going to be made available, I believe, and so I'll turn it over to you.
Oops, it was loud. Okay, so the second part. In this section, we explore how academic researchers leverage our NSC data and combine this data with other data sets to deepen the analysis. There will be 7 cases, so 7 research papers, each on separate slide. We don't need to go through all of them right now, so you can refer, the slides can be found on the app, on the website. So I just quickly explain first how each slide is organized, so you can review them on their own if you're interested. Basically, this slide is just food for thought, right? How you can combine different data and what kind of insights you can get out of it. So here, the first project, let's start with this is a paper that is, in a sense, similar to the last project on the climate risk that Kelly discussed. And the benefit of having this slide, basically you can refer to this paper. If you're very curious about climate risk exposure, you can pull this paper and read in detail how they calculate this exposure. So all the slides will be organized in such a way, like basically the title is the research question or research topic. It will be the title of the paper. And I will be reading these slides from left to right. So at the left, I start with the NSC data. In the center, it will be other data. And at the left, in that corner, right, it will be main conclusions. And in the bottom, you see little link. It's basically a reference to the paper. So here, I will quickly run through this project because it's so similar in a sense to our previous research on the climate risk. So researchers, the author, took NSC data on loans by the zip code, right? And link the climate risk by the zip code, and they talk about flood and sea level rise. So it makes sense, right? So, and basically they infer the percent of the loan values exposed to this risk, and it's 45%, so it's a lot, it's substantial. So let's go through the second project. So our next example, so the authors exploring further the climate risk, climate change theme, right? So the research question is, how insurance markets adapting to climate change? So first, again, authors took NSC data, so on profits of insurance transactions by state and insurance lines. And they added, very interesting stuff. They added parcel level house characteristics to calculate parcel level risk exposure. And they also calculate risk exposure on the zip code level. So we have 2 different calculations, right? Very detailed and coarse in a sense, right? And they found out that, they concluded, what was obvious from this analysis, that if insurance company use coarser risk measure by zip code, it tend to overcharge for their, basically for insurance, and they tend to have higher spikes, the price of the insurance growing faster, so they have higher losses, charge higher prices, and basically they discuss economics behind it. So the insurers that construct the insurance premium by parcel, they basically at the end had higher profits and stayed on all the markets, including the high climate risk markets. So what? So the next one, this slide, let's shift focus to health insurance markets right now. So authors exploring, doesn't matter if your health insurer is for profit. And basically, they use NSC data on insurance, on coverage rates, and medical loss ratios. They add data from large employer health insurance data, and basically use an event, very interesting event, conversion of Blue Cross Blue Shield from nonprofit to for-profit. And basically they compare all the premiums, all the exposures, enrollment around this event, before and after. And they show statistically that for-profit insurers can impact Medicaid enrollment and increase premiums, employer premiums. So especially on the markets where their share is substantial. So the next one is about price regulations and welfare. So again, we're using NSC data on long-term care insurance experience reports. The authors adding data on insurers' rate increase history. And they analyze how rates changing around an event, another event. It's rate stability regulation of 2000. And they show statistically that indeed this regulation helped improving rate stability, right? But it reduced number of available plans and insurers on the market. This research highlights the trade-off between consumer protection and market competition in these heavy regulated industries. One more research. So here, what we have in these slides, authors explore price variation in Medigap insurance policies. So what the heck is this? So Medigap is a private individual insurance market for supplemental Medicare coverage. So this market with relatively homogeneous goods, so they're kind of the same-ish, but prices are very different. So, and the authors try to explore why this is happening, what's happening with the market. So they took NSC data on premiums, claims, covered lives, and they look at the detailed data on premiums for Medigap plan letters by gender, age, rating method, zip code. They also added financial safety ratings of insurance firms. And they discovered that, in a sense, market is inefficient. It costs a lot. It's very costly to search for a plan. They even calculated that the average search cost is $72, and insurance agents not helping in the search efforts. So they're not guiding individuals to the lowest prices. So this is basically this research highlights the concern about market efficiency. So I guess we can cover all the papers. Okay, so the next research, next slide, authors look at the financial conditions and portfolio choices in the case of insurers. So what we have an NSC data on insurers' financials and premiums, and we need data on financial portfolios. So it's the first other data, financial assets. So they also have shocks. It's data on damages due to weather from National Centers for Environmental Information, and basically they have the shocks. So it's costly shocks, and they look how portfolio composition of financial assets changing after the shocks. And they proved that constrained institutional investors, it's basically all insurance companies, right? Reduce allocation to riskier assets especially after big losses. So they basically prioritize stability, financial flexibility, and tend to stop gambling basically with market. So, and the last research paper look at the fragility of the market risk insurance. This paper, the authors again took NAIC data on financials, and they look at a particular market of variable annuities. So what is this? Why it's interesting? So it can serve as a proxy of government pension plans. So basically you're getting, by buying this product, you're basically getting a cash flow that is linked to the profits of underlying asset. Basically, you can buy this product from insurance companies and have a stream of cash flows over 20 years, 30 years. So it's interesting to look at this market because in a sense, it's like pension plans, kind of tapping into this interesting topic. And what they found, they look at the financials of insurance companies, they look at the sales of these variable annuities, and look at the history, what's happened with this market. And they found, unfortunately, that during financial crisis, they saw reduced sales and increased fees and less generous guarantees on these instruments, and causing significant equity losses, again, during the COVID as well, COVID pandemic. So here is the PROMIS references. So here where you can find all the papers. And in conclusion, on this block, so we see that combining NAIC data with secondary data provides extra insights, richer, more detailed understanding of insurance industry. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
So secondary data is clearly quite useful, but one thing I would want to know though is, do you have any tips with regards to how to ensure that the secondary data sources have good integrity, that the data is validated and all of that? Do you have any tips there? Because the saying with data is, garbage in, garbage out. It's like you want to make sure that if you're using secondary data, it's actually accurate and reliable and whatnot. So I was wondering if you have any tips for ensuring that the data is accurate and that it has good integrity.
Yes, so I have this problem when I use proprietary data, what we got on super detailed transaction level data. So, and our concern was, it's proprietary data, right? So how we can check whether it's true. And in this research, I worked with the chief economist of US CFTC, and his first note was, okay, let's find the public similar data set in a sense, but publicly available, and just check whether it makes sense in terms of the levels of the data, in terms of the changes overall of the data. Yeah, so it's always double checking with another sources. This is it. So you can go through methodology, but especially if it's proprietary data sets, you just cannot rely fully. You need to find similar data from the same market, or maybe from the market along the supply chain, to double check.
Let me add, if I can. First of all, I mean, if you want it to be from a reputable source, But even reputable sources can get things wrong. So the Census Bureau, for example, has gotten data wrong before. You need to look at the data. So a lot of people, not a lot, but some people, a significant number of people, will take data and do analysis on the data without ever having looked at the data itself. And I call it a sanity check, where the data should look right. Okay, so if you see something that's way off, even single data points that seem like they're nonsensical, that sanity test can help you figure out if the data is problematic. Also, when you do your analysis, a lot of times you'll have results for variables that aren't your key variables of interest, and you should have reasonable results for those too. So, for example, if you were looking at in median income, determinants of median income, and you had rural and urban in there, then there's a lot of research to show that median income is higher in urban areas, so you should find that. So you can compare with other research that's been done as well.
Yeah, I would also recommend, for example, to pull one number, one raw, and just check it. For example, exposure to climate risk. We had a universe of the municipal bonds, and I just took a couple of bonds from our energy company in the area from the county I lived in, right? So, and I just opened all the disclosures, all this 300 pages disclosures, and I look at the raw in this data set and check every number for this particular company. And yeah.
If it's okay for a sample, it's probably okay for the whole data set. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for attending our session. Enjoy the rest of the Insurance Summit.